Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone for being on this amazing Zoom that's going to be moderated by Tanis Jones and some amazing panelists that we have on for today. So on behalf of Focus for Health, thank you everyone for joining us. I've personally been with the Focus for Health family since 2015, and I joined their board a couple years back, and it's just been an amazing journey since then. And so we're super just ecstatic to start this conversation, especially during Black History Month, with some powerful Black women. They're going to be talking about some real serious topics today. They're going to have some fun. I'm sure Tanis will throw in a joke or two at some point. But real quick, I want everyone right now to head on over to Facebook. We're live streaming this. So I want every single person on this call to go to Facebook, click on like, and live stream this right now, please. So I'm gonna take a minute. We're just gonna take a minute to make that happen. It's critically important that people are aware of these conversations and hear what you guys have to say. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my partner in crime and the co-founder of the Black Village Foundation, which hopefully you guys will all get a chance to check out later on. But Tanis Jones, tell you guys a little bit about her, other than her being my partner in crime and a lot of different just different things that we do in the community. She is also an actress, and so she is known for her role on the Fox hit series Empire. She's an actress, a fashion designer, motivational speaker. She was the Celebrity MasterChef champion as well. She can cook, man. If you guys get invited to one of her cookouts, it's amazing. She's also a philanthropist. Like I said, she's most known for her breakout role as Portia on Fox's hit television show Empire, in her first two starring roles as Lisa J in BT's Hip Hop Holiday and Shannara Mobley in Stolen from My Mother, the Kamaya Mobley story, which is a very, very touching story. She's right now on the new hit TV comedy Call Your Mother on ABC. But more than just an actress, like I said, she's my partner in crime. She spends her off season as a not-for-profit leader. Since the beginning of COVID, she's given away hundreds of thousands of pounds of food, PPE, and we just recently launched our Build Black Wealth grants in honor of Black History Month. And so we're giving away $35,000 to Black Chicagoans in the form of 28 grants, which is crazy because it kind of just like worked out. It kind of worked out perfectly because February is 28 days. And so we have 28 grants that are available. So check us out on our Black Village Foundation. And without further ado, my co-host, my co-founder, Tanis Jones.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon to our panelists, Zoom audience, and everybody watching on Facebook. I'm Tanis Jones, as Sub stated. I don't really need to introduce you guys anymore because you didn't say it all. I am an actress, rapper, and philanthropist, and also one of the founders of Black Village Foundation. First of all, I just want to say it is an honor and a privilege to be here and to be part of this amazing panel and being able to talk to some of these amazing women who are doing a lot of things for the city. Now, I ain't gonna lie, I almost didn't make it because I ain't too computer savvy, but we got it together. So I just want to thank Focus for Health for giving me the opportunity and being able to allow these women to have their voices heard. So we're just gonna dive in the combo now. I know we normally introduce panelists in the traditional form, so I'm gonna change it up. I'm gonna do a little different. Now, I'm real huge on manifestation. And a big part of that we don't talk about is reflection. So just like I said, I'm not gonna do the traditional way of introducing each panelist. I'm gonna do it a little different. So what I'm gonna do is I would like for you ladies to tell us how your past influenced you and what you're doing now. And Raioni, we'll start with you. And then you can just kind of give us, and you can just kind of tell us what you do and what you're doing for the city.
Yes, my name is Raioni Madison-Jones. I'm the founder of 3D Girls Inc. We are located in Atlanta, Georgia. Our mission is to educate and empower young women to be advocates for themselves and their families. And what inspires my work and the work that we're doing here in Atlanta is simply my past. I don't think if I didn't have the upbringing and some of the things that I experienced as a child, happened to me, I wouldn't be here ready to educate and empower young women. So as a former educator, I saw that there was a gap in, you know, some of the things that the girls were experiencing and learning. And, you know, I spent some of my extra time right after undergrad, and I did some mentoring. I had great mentors and great coaches in my life to kind of help me push through the obstacles of being a young mom. And that inspired me to be where I am today, working with young mothers, providing care packages and resources for job training and workforce development, as well as youth development, working with young girls in mentoring programs. So I'm here because of my past, and I'm really excited to be on this panel with all of you ladies, and I'm looking forward to learning more.
Thank you. Farah, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Farah Tanis. I am one of the founders and co-executive director of Black Women's Blueprint. We're a national organization, although we really focus on the New York, New Jersey area, especially during COVID. We provide healing services. We provide advocacy work. We also organize communities and empower women in particular to live and step into their full potential. My past really is just about that, right? Really a struggle to step into my full potential, right? The potential that I know has been set out before me by my ancestors. You know, I always got to bring in the ancestors. As children of immigrants, you know, growing up in the United States with my parents, I come from a home where there was a lot of domestic violence and all forms of, gender violence, really. I grew up watching that, you know, in my household and protecting my siblings. And so that really informed, you know, my life and the choices that I made and sort of like how I stepped into my power around gender justice, around human rights, around ending police violence and police brutality, around empowering girls and young women. And so that's been, that's been my work, and that is how I live my life. So there's a way in which I always talk about myself as, being put on this planet, not only to do this work, but to live my life in a particular way. And that is ensuring that we live our full potential and that we remain connected with each other as Black women and as people.
Thank you, Farah. Sevonna, I'm gonna pass it to you.
Thank you, and gratitude to each of you, and excited to be in conversation with each of you. My name is Sevonna Brown. I'm the co-executive director at Black Women's Blueprint, and Farah shared some background about who we are, and I'm excited to share more about the work that we do and just hear more about the work that you all do as well. Like many of you, my past brought me to this work. I believe it literally carried me to the doorstep of the work that I do. I also grew up in a home where there was lots of violence of many forms. The youngest of 7 was homeschooled, so very much at the beginning of my life, was very, very close to my mother, nurtured by my mother, learned what motherhood is and looks like from her, and also from my grandmothers and my aunties. So I was raised in a home of matriarchs who were not, and necessarily are not, seen as matriarchs, but they carried the household, they carried the work, they carried the labor, they carried and were and continue to be the backbone of our family. My family has a great migration story. So I'm from the Midwest by way of Mississippi and Kansas and also Georgia. I come from midwives, and I come from healers and artists and church people. Baptist, Pentecostal traditions are a through line in my background. And definitely my story as a survivor of violence and abuse has brought me into this work with Black Women's Blueprint, addressing trauma that Black women and Black girls face around not just this country, but also around the continent of Africa and throughout the world and throughout the African diaspora. And so certainly centering our culture, our resilient strategies, our ritual, whether it is music or dance or poetry, or the ways that we communicate with one another and have communicated with one another for the sake of our freedom and for the sake of liberation, is how I come to this work I am also a doula, so I'm a reproductive justice activist and a reproductive health worker. And I'm excited just to hear more about those who are on this call and in conversation with you all, to learn how your stories push you forward, and hopefully to offer and engage with the audience as well today. So thank you.
Listen, Sevonna, you got a lot of stuff up under your belt. I just want to say you are the epitome of Black girl magic. And all around the way girl. I don't know if you ever heard all around the way, all that word. We'll go to you, Chloe, and you let us know how has your past influenced what you're doing now?
Absolutely, and very excited to be here. Yeah, so my name is Chloe McKenzie. I'm the founder and CEO of BlackFem, and we're a nonprofit with a mission to transform school-based learning so that Black girls and girls of color have the abilities to develop the skills, habits, and resources to build and sustain wealth. So I've been in what I call the wealth justice space for about 7 years now. I got my start on Wall Street. So what's interesting about my past is I usually used to start my story from when I graduated college. But I've decided most recently, or because of the work that I'm doing, is actually my story started, much earlier than that. And so we'll start there. So I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland. It's one of only 7 counties in the country where Black families have more wealth than white families. So I grew up in a really different universe where when some of my white classmates would try to be racist or, say racist things to us, our quick response and retort as Black students was to say, oh, well, we have more money than you. So even though that's, problematic in and of itself, where we're trying to kind of retaliate using kind of shaming strategies, using socioeconomics, that was kind of our experience. And I didn't realize it until, about 2 years ago, how much growing up with privilege informed the work that I do in wealth justice. It's unfortunate that we kind of have similar stories across the panel of being survivors of violence and abuse and trauma in the home. That was also my experience. So even though I, was able to go to private school and, had privilege, I spent much of my childhood and teenage years having to reject that in order to escape the violence in and of itself. So as a self-proclaimed nerd, I skipped 2 grades. So when I was 12 years old, I was a freshman in high school. And so one of the things that I was experiencing in the home was my parents were also going through a really nasty divorce. And I fell in love with Matilda in elementary school. And so loved to read. And again, unbeknownst to me as a 12-year-old who was kind of going through so much kind of abuse and trauma at home, I read a lot of law books. And I think it was because I was preparing myself to kind of escape and get out. And so I read in a law book as a 12-year-old that you could request time with the judge if your parents were getting divorced as soon as you turned 12. So I got a court advocate. I was able to present my case before the judge and make sure that it was legally codified in my parents' divorce papers that my college and my siblings' college would be paid for. And so that actually was one of the first kind of moments where I realized that my trajectory and what I was going to do in the world was going to be different. So then, I got as far away as I could for college. I studied law and thought I was going to be a lawyer, but I ended up becoming a trader on Wall Street. So fast forward to then, I was a trader on Wall Street. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, I was the Taraji P. Henson on, the only Black woman on a floor of 300 people. It was the only one. And so in many ways, because I was an athlete, that made me more competitive and had more drive. But as we know, that's very taxing at the same time. And I was trading student loans, mortgages, credit card receivables, and auto loans. So I felt morally bankrupt at all times, that I started to really put 2 and 2 together of, how is it that we're in after the 2008 financial crisis, but I'm trading all of the debt that average Americans are really struggling with. And so what I decided to do to make myself feel better was on nights and weekends, I became a financial counselor at a homeless shelter. And so I really started to do a lot of academic research and work around the wealth gap, but its particular impact and unique kind of experience that Black women have. Because when we talk about the racial wealth gap or the gender wealth gap, we actually render people who look like us invisible. So the racial wealth gap, we tend to think Black man. The gender wealth gap, we tend to think white women. So where the hell do we show up? And so the work that I do in wealth justice is really looking at the ways that Black women's unique struggle against wealth inequality and economic violence is the most severe, intractable, and damaging inequality that we face today. And so, you know, this kind of informs all of my work, but then most recently, which I know we'll talk about, my research in financial trauma, and then to kind of wrap up my story is, I got to a point where, you know, I have 12 different financial certifications. I'm a wealth manager, investment advisor, you know, classic Black woman who has to over-credentialize to feel like people will listen to her. And I started to get imposter syndrome. I was like, how is it that you are considered a wealth expert, but you have a contentious and kind of toxic relationship with money? What does that mean? And so I started to study the ways that what actually has an impact or an influence on a person's wealth building capability. And a lot of people think that it's just, oh, I just need to know money skills, right? I just need to know money management skills. But my research suggests that that actually has the smallest influence on your wealth building capability. The impact of financial trauma, which we'll get into later, actually has the largest influence on your wealth building capability. And so that's how my work has been informed, and I continue to, you know, work to advance wealth justice in the world, specifically for Black women and women of color.
Thank you, Chloe. First of all, I just want to take a second to tell each of you ladies that I simply adore you guys and what you're doing and how you're doing it. This is literally the epitome of Black girl magic. So those of you who are just joining Facebook and you don't really know what's going on, but us Black women are on here and we're diving in the convo of how we as Black women are building our future. So the next question is, of course, it's Black History Month. And it wouldn't be right if we didn't pay homage to the people who paved the way for people like myself, you, and you. I've been inspired by a lot of our ancestors, my grandmother in particular, who has groomed me to be the woman that I am today. I want to ask each of you ladies, who are some of the women who inspired you? And I'll continue with you, Chloe, sorry. You can go ahead and start.
So I designed my office as a shrine to the Black women's shoulders who I stand on. So you can see behind me, I have Shirley Chisholm, who's my, like, I don't know, just everything. And Marsha P. Johnson, who is a Black trans woman who, you know, basically started, you know, so much of the advocacy and organizing work, not just for the LGBT community, but just Black women more broadly. But I'll just give you all a little peek. So I've got Kamala and Ida and,
yes.
and if I can turn over here, I've got Zora Neale Hurston and Anita Hill and Toni Morrison and Mae Jemison and Katherine Johnson. So, you know, these are the women that I look up to. And I think it's just because, you know, I'll use Shirley's words that they were unbought and unbossed, and really you were able to capture the way that we can define what it means to live, to be grounded, to be at one with ourselves and kind of have a different sense of our own consciousness. So these are the women that, you know, truly, I don't know, they're everything to me. So
I love it. I love it. Farah, I'm gonna go to you. Farah, you have this very powerful presence about yourself. No, seriously, you do. So I want to know some of the women who inspired you.
Oh my goodness. The women who inspired me are from all over the world. Wangari Maathai, one in Kenya, who really, environmental justice was her calling. I mean, but I think when I think of women who have been powerful, when I think of women who have risked their lives, right, for liberation and to build countries, right? I think of Miriam Millet also from Haiti, who was a feminist, a Black feminist, right, in her own right, in her own culture, who really helped build and remake Haiti when Haiti was doing something that was really deeply about changing the discourse of power around women, right? So, and she died during the 2010 earthquake. I think about Rebecca Lolo Solit, who founded the matriarchal village in also in Kenya. I mean, there are so many living and passed on, but in the United States, I really want to pay homage to a lot of the Black immigrant women who were here, who worked alongside with Black civil rights leaders, with Black women's rights leaders like Claudia Jones. You got Audre Lorde, hello, descendant from the Caribbean. Shirley Chisholm, who was just named, also from, descendants of people from the Caribbean. But most of all, I want to pay homage to Ella Baker. Most people don't think about Ella Baker as much as they should think about Ella Baker, and how powerful this woman was in her humility and in being the conscience of the civil rights movement, in holding the Black leaders accountable, right? In saying, listen, charismatic leadership is fabulous. However, if you don't build leaders for the future, when we go on, what happens to our people? And what she said is, strong people don't need strong leaders. Not very popular in this day and age. But what she was saying is, if you give them the mic, they'll find their voice. If you give people the mic, they'll find their own voice. And so being the voice for people is one thing. Being a voice for yourself is even more critical. And that is really the way that, I think leadership should be. And I know we'll talk about that later on, but really being the conscience of a Black movement that often forgets Black women and girls is incredibly important. And that's the role that Ella Baker played. And that's the role that I see myself playing in today's racial justice movements and in human rights movements that forget all about women and girls too often.
See, Farah, I told you, you powerful.
You're powerful,
Raioni,
Rhonda.
I'm gonna pass it to you. Can you tell us some of the people or some of the women who inspired you?
Yeah, when I think about the Black women, the history of Black women, any Black women who has, paved the way, you think about their stories, you think about the impact you think about them doing the work, right? And when I think about the work that I do in educating and empowering and being an advocate for other women and girls, I think about Angela Davis, a living legend who is just amazing at what she has done for communities and what she does consistently as an activist. And the quote just, I can no longer accept the things that I can't change, but I'm changing the things that I'm willing to accept. Like, that is inspiring to me, to know that we as women have the power to make a change just by doing the work. And there are several local women who are doing the work that I am just completely inspired by. And I look at Dr. Key Holman here in Atlanta, Georgia. She is the founder of the Village Market ATL, and she is so important to the community in terms of building community and circulating the Black dollar and helping to rejuvenate and revitalize our communities here and nationally. And I see Jasmine Crow, who is the founder of Gooder. She is helping to limit the waste of food in our country, helping to globally save food, save people from hunger. And so it's people like that that I personally know, and I have had the opportunity to be in their presence and to be able to learn and be inspired by their work, just simply watching and absorbing that aura, absorbing that power, absorbing that strength that they possess to change the world. I think that is so important, to have people who are doing the work as your role models, and as people who, will inspire you to do better with the community or with the gift. My pastor used to say, everybody has a nation waiting on them. So whoever your nation is, your nation of people that you serve, it's good to have those models within that nation to push forth and do the work.
I love it. Sevonna, to my all around array girl. Can you name some of the women who inspired you?
Absolutely. I mean, again, living and transition, there are just so many giants that I think about. And, Farah named so many of the Black feminist giants. I think about also Harriet Tubman. I think about our gun-toting compass, right? She was an incredibly fierce, she was a warrior, right? Boots, hat, not to be played with, not to be messed with. Would walk through water to get her people free and to create freedom and to seek liberation. And I think about her and the lengths that she went and the sacrifices that she made, and also the ways that she inspired people to break their own chains. Like the way that demonstrates to me so much possibility and freedom for how we can be in the futures that we get to create. I also think about Sojourner Truth. Again, someone who, when their feet hit the ground, like you feel the earth tremble. Like I can feel that just experience from reading about her and hearing other people embody her voice. Something people don't know about Sojourner Truth is that she was really tall. She was like 6 feet something. And she was born with the name Tree in her name because she came out a giant. And I think the mountains that she moved and the ways that she paved the way for the ways we even think about Black feminisms and Black womanhood are just incredible, shape-shifting. I also think about the midwives. So many midwives who, people think midwives just deliver babies, but midwives are community pillars. I know stories of midwives putting out fires and picking up groceries, and they are also giants in their community, right? So midwives like Mama Saran, Jenny Joseph, Shafia Monroe, just incredible women who teach us how to be in community with each other in dynamic ways. And then the last woman I'll name is a matriarch of my family who is still living, and she's like about 5.5 miles from where I'm sitting right now. She's 106 years old.
Wow.
If you put an organ in front of her, she will play it. If she needs to tell a child something across the way, she will scream it across the train tracks. Just a fierce, incredibly beautiful person who is a woman of faith, who I know is physically fit and well because she prays on her knees every night and has all of her life, who holds so much story and generational legacy and wealth inside of her because of her faith and the way that she walks and talks with God on a regular basis. And so her faith leadership in my family continues to be a testimony, and she's someone whose shoulders I stand on, and I'm grateful to still be in community and relationship with her.
I love it. My great grandmother was 106 before she passed, and I was fortunate enough to watch her live and fortunate enough for her to plant the seeds that she planted in me. I was in 8th grade when she passed. Yep. So I love to hear it. I love to see it. So Sevonna, I'm gonna keep it on you.
Sure.
I know you with Black Women's Blueprint,
Yes.
work to end sexual trauma against women. And I want to know, what are some of the programs you advocate for women?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you for that question. And I know that we shared, and I want to just acknowledge and bear witness to each of us, right, who shared some kind of story around trauma, around violence, around what we've witnessed, what we've experienced in our own bodies, right? And so at Black Women's Blueprint, really the way that we look at and think about ending sexual trauma is from this lens of body sovereignty. We hear a lot, particularly in Black and Native and Indigenous communities, about land sovereignty and food sovereignty. And for us, that is deeply connected to our body sovereignty. It's deeply connected to our autonomy over self, right? Whether we are giving birth, or we are going to dance at the club, or we are in our own homes or in our own communities, our autonomy and our agency over ourselves is something that we specifically think about. And the ways that we think about that is really from the framework of safety and dignity, from thinking about our rights to our own bodies, our rights to move freely in our communities without being harmed, or on a campus without being harmed, right? So we advocate for programs that are really undergirded by this notion of body sovereignty. And specifically, if I think about like Black maternal wellness or Black maternal health or reproductive health, I'm thinking about respect in childbirth. I'm thinking about prenatal access and care and support that surrounds the whole person and the whole woman. I'm thinking about the right to access food that keeps us healthy in our communities, that eliminates things like fibroids and cysts and cancers that surface in our bodies as a result of trauma, right? As a result of not having access to holistic medicine and herbalism and healing. And so what we're doing right now at Black Women's Blueprint is we are building on 300 acres of land that we have just acquired. We are building that sovereignty. We're building a community where women, their children, their communities can access that body sovereignty, can be whole, can heal, can access food, can have access to a farm and distribution of vegetables and fruits and that which keeps us sustained as women and as people. And then also advocating for what happens when we leave our contexts, right? When we leave our homes or our communities where there is that safety and dignity and body sovereignty, that we have access to it. If we're in the medical institution, or if we're at a gynecologist's office, or again, on campus or anywhere, that we have access to consent, access to safety, access to freedom, access to our well-being. And so concretely what that looks like is we operate a mobile unit called Sisters Van, where we bring those items to community. We bring them to survivors of sexual trauma. We bring feminine hygiene products and pads and tampons and emergency contraception. We bring that healthy food and hygiene kits to women who are living and experiencing homelessness, to young women, to young girls. So when we talk about advocating for programs that specifically look at sexual trauma, we're talking about body sovereignty all around, all together, from multiple entry points, whether it be systemic or individual or societal or culturally. Body sovereignty and really this conversation around choice and dignity is what informs that for us.
Thank you, Sevonna. I appreciate that. Thank you. Quick second, just for the guys, everybody who's on Facebook, if you're logging on, feel free to ask a question. We will be answering them at the end of the chat. Just quick heads up, okay? Back at it. Farah, how does individual and collective trauma play a role in the physical, mental, physical health of Black women in the communities you serve?
Thank you for asking that. And that's so important, especially now in the age of COVID, right? Where people are sheltering in place and where women and girls in Black communities who are already at higher risk for catching COVID, who already have lack of access to healthcare, are also dealing with abuse in their own homes and lack of access to services because you can't leave, or because the organization that you go to is closed, or the Black organization you go to is under-resourced, and so they can't continue to provide the services they used to, right? So it's a very important question, because when you think about trauma, we can go back to this whole issue of body sovereignty that Sevonna talked about, the right to full control and autonomy and agency and ownership of your body, no matter how old you are, right? Especially as a Black girl, and why that's important for us, right? Because it's directly related to the historical context that is enslavement, right? The historical context driven by profit motives, right? That means centuries of forced physical, sexual, and reproductive labor, as well as the legalized sale, right, of our bodies as Black women, as Black enslaved women in this country, and the legalized sale of our children. So that goes back to that sovereignty. When you think about collective trauma, that plays into that collective trauma. Within the context of that history, we think of Black women as living with this memory inside of them, and this history comprises most of our collective trauma. That collective trauma then is superimposed on individual lived experiences, like the discrimination that we experience based on our gender or ethnicity or any other identity. Black women today continue to face higher rates of violence and report a reluctance to report that. Many of us know this, right? As 1 in 15 disclose or don't disclose, right? They disclose either to, authorities or to, the general public that they've been sexually assaulted. Black women still make up half to 1/3 of those experiencing domestic violence homicides, those victimized by domestic violence homicides. And so that gives you a sense of not just the collective, but what is still happening in our lives as far as the high rates of abuse. Black advocates continue to echo what the author of Violence in the African American Community, Linda Marie Jordan, what she says. She says violence done to people of color is permissible, but the most permissible form of violence in communities of color is that against Black women by Black men. So I'm gonna put it out there, right? Those with whom we live, those who we protest for, on behalf of, those who we protect are the ones who are harming us. So when we talk about collective and individual trauma, we need to look at what has happened outside of the community historically, but also speak truths, y'all, about what is happening right now inside our communities because we're sheltering in place, inside our homes because we're sheltering in place. So given this, I want to just point to a little bit of just, research around the consequences to a lifetime of violence and abuse, right? So Coliva identifies 150 consequences to a lifetime of abuse, especially sexual abuse, physical abuse. The impacts are on the functions of the entire body. And this is not just for Black women, this is for all survivors, right? Anyone who has survived any form of trauma, but sexual violence in particular. These impacts range from neurological to dental to dermatological to respiratory, pulmonary. Things you wouldn't even think are impacted by trauma are impacted by trauma. We already know that trauma impacts, whether it's collective, historical, or individual trauma that we experience as Black women. We already know that it impacts, for our ability to fully self-actualize in many, many, many ways. It impacts that. Despite, everything that has happened, we know that we are resilient people, but it impacts maternal mortality, violence, the impact of trauma, maternal morbidity. Survivors report immediate and long-term physical and sexual health effects, like, of course, immediate effects are bruises, black eyes, genital injuries, sexually transmitted infections. The mental health impacts include the post-traumatic stress, which many of you know is a full range. It manifests in a full range of symptoms, depression, suicidal ideation, if not suicide, pain-related health problems, issues around confidence. There's a cyclical relationship as well, if we're talking about the impact. A cyclical relationship between trauma, especially experienced through violence, and economic well-being, really, economic equity, and poverty, right? There's a correlation. People who experience violence have lowered chances of reaching their economic potentials. And cyclically, those who are experiencing poverty are more at risk for experiencing violence. Poverty presents a risk, gender presents a risk. So there's a major, this is a major question that you're asking, and a very important one, especially for those who are listening and for those who are sheltering in place or know someone who is sheltering in place. Think of the impact of trauma in the lives of Black women, and think of what it means to intervene and intervene now, because many of our organizations and those that we traditionally depend on to intervene don't necessarily have the resources right now to intervene. BWB is doing what it can with our Sisters Van, this mobile unit that goes out and provide services. We have telehealth. And so we can engage with survivors and people experiencing trauma to continue our healing work through that, right? And you were talking, we heard the wonderful work that you yourself are doing, Taronda, to provide food, right? And other, and protective gear and other resources to communities. You know, we are doing that as well. You know, it's time that we support each other so that we can interrupt the impact of trauma. So that work you're doing, that's exactly, you know, the impact as well, right? So that is how we can undermine and we can interrupt the impact of trauma, both collectively and individually. By the very act of you acting on behalf of a sister or brother in the community, that interrupts and undermines and challenges the impact of trauma in our lives collectively as a community through that mutual aid. And of course, individually, because even the act of helping is healing for us and it's healing for those who are receiving the help.
Yeah. Thank you, Farah. Appreciate that. While we're on the topic of trauma, Chloe, I know you do a lot of research on financial trauma. Can you explain what that is and how it can impact our future?
Yes, and Farah, you such a lovely segue to kind of be able to talk about this. So I mentioned in my story that I started on Wall Street. And so this was kind of my first real understanding of the way that our economic system works. I think we all can agree, we know that it's rigged. We know that it's inherently white supremacist. We all know that, but what I've done in my research over the last 2 years is really try to understand why our research and responses and solutions to economic inequality are continuing to be so woefully inadequate, especially when it comes to Black women. So let's talk about wealth kind of in general first, right? So there are a number of different issues. And frankly, by the way, after I left Wall Street, the reason why I got into financial education was because I drank the Kool-Aid in thinking that, you know, knowledge alone somehow will allow us to kickstart this effort to close the wealth gap. When now I've learned and continue to evolve that that's actually not enough, and that's just another kind of inadequate band-aid strategy that, you know, I'll get to. So let's talk about wealth. So, you know, oftentimes the way that we are exposed to wealth is through people's net worth. So net worth, we hear this in Drake songs. We tend to, every time Beyonce drops an album, we want to see what her net worth is. So the net worth is essentially a way of capturing how wealthy somebody is, but it's used in an economic sense. And it's usually in a number, a quantity, right? So you can have a positive net worth, you can have a negative net worth, you can have a net worth that's zero. And so typically when people tend to think about the wealth gap, we think, you know, of this very harrowing statistic that Black women's median net worth is $5. Well, what does that really mean? How do you calculate your net worth? Your net worth is you take all the value of all of the things that you own, your assets. It could be a home, it could be a car, it could be stocks, etc. What's in your bank account or savings account. You subtract all of the money that you owe, so all of the debt obligations that you have, and that's how you get to your net worth. So that in and of itself is a problem, the way that we choose to conceptualize wealth, because what this actually tells us is this. When the essence of our understanding of people's economic and financial experiences is rooted in a quantity or a number, that essentially means we're equating somebody's inherent worth with their net worth. And this is kind of where we are. But let's back it up even further. So I don't see wealth as the value of your assets offset by how much debt you have. I don't see wealth as that. This is how I see wealth. It's in the American context. I don't agree with it, but this is the system. Wealth determines who gets to decide who is systematically offered or denied safety, belonging, and dignity, to use Sevonna's words. So in other words, in this country, the wealthiest people are the ones who decide whether I am going to be systematically offered or denied safety, belonging, and dignity. The other thing that we don't understand about wealth, because of how our economic system was built, which was on slavery, wealth requires violence. To build wealth requires violence, even in today's context. And I'll talk about that in a second. But what are the two, all of the wealth in the Western world more broadly, but especially in the American context, came from two things: stolen indigenous land and violence perpetrated against Black bodies through the institution of slavery. So you talk about that trauma lives within us and is embodied in our financial behavior. That doesn't mean it's our fault, but that's embodied in our financial behavior. The violence that was perpetrated to create all of the wealth that created this, quote, wealthiest nation in the world, that lives within us. So let's start there with financial trauma. And so because wealth building requires violence, there is this serious cognitive dissonance. Part of the reason why we have such a contentious relationship with money, we don't know how to talk about it, and we have very awkward, contentious, often unhealthy and toxic relationships with money, value, wealth, and worth, is because all of the narratives that are made available to us structure those relationships. The way that we teach people what to do with their money, that's actually a micro invalidation. It's an invasion on our autonomy, all of these different things. And so what I started to study with financial trauma was I used my own story, right? So again, I grew up very privileged. I grew up in a violent household, but privileged nonetheless. I then became a financial expert. Like I said, I've been in the wealth management space for a long time. I started getting into the wealth justice space, and I thought to myself, well, the reason why I'm going into wealth justice and financial education is because if everybody just knows what I know about money and how to build wealth, then we could close the wealth gap, right? Because that's the kind of linear algorithmic type thinking that the violent economic system purports, it posits or, to us, right? What I realize now is, after doing so much of the work, and unbeknownst to me, these were all of the things I already embedded into the model that I created at BlackFem, and the other work that I do says this. So if knowledge alone, right, just knowing how to build wealth and then getting access to those assets and things like that was actually going to close the wealth gap, then why do I still have a contentious relationship with money? I'm a money expert. I have 16 different financial certifications. Financially, I'm fine and comfortable. Why do I still have a contentious relationship with money? So I started to actually study this for myself, and then realized that there's actually two sides to money. There's two dimensions. And it kind of annoyed me because I hate binaries, but right now there's basically two according to my research. There's what's called the economic side of money. And this is, how do you budget? How do you trade? How do you, build all of these kind of financial skills that we are used to talking about when we hear financial literacy. Those are important. It's not to say that we don't need to know those things. But the other side of money, the other dimension, is what I call the extra economic. And this is all of the historical trauma, all of the financial experiences, all of the emotions that make up our relationship with money, value, wealth, and worth. And what I've studied over the last 2 years is to say which side has a greater influence on your wealth building capability. And I've now been able to report, and I do a lot of research that people are now citing and dealing with, which is that the economic side, right, that everybody says, oh, well, if you just know how to budget, or you just know how to do this and you just know how to do that, has the smallest impact on your wealth building capability. Even if you know what that is, it doesn't actually change the trajectory of your wealth building capability until you heal from the extra economic kind of dimension of money. So financial trauma is this. Financial trauma is the cumulative effect of the generations of wounding that people or peoples have experienced from an economic dimension. So it's looking at how governments, communities, cultural institutions, workplace institutions abuse you economically, which I call financial abuse, and financially shaming. So the shaming, the effort of like, oh, good example, the CNBC article that's like, here's what you should do with your second stimulus check, as if people don't know what they need to do when they're getting survival checks, for example. That's an act of financial shaming that, if it's sustained over a longer period of time, turns into trauma. And then that trauma is then embodied in our financial behavior. And if we don't actually heal from that trauma, it doesn't matter how much you know. You can know about credit default swaps and all of the other sophisticated economic things. It will not change your wealth building capability. So what's confusing about all of this with financial trauma is it begs the question, to what extent are we required to experience violent trauma, abuse, and shaming in order to achieve or attain safety, belonging, and dignity? And that's our day-to-day financial experiences in this country. And that's kind of the work that I do that informs how we need to start talking about wealth. And one of kind of my biggest goals is that we begin to adopt this lexicon. So what does it look like to have to tell your employer that you're being financially abusive? It's not just unfair, but you're being abusive. And that's having an overarching effect on my ability to attain material safety, let alone physical safety, emotional safety, relational safety, etc.
Right.
When we think about, and I'll finish on this, the cultural messages that we get, which tells us that we have to pay money to belong, right? So getting the latest iPhone or new Jordans and things like that, that's fine if you want that. But to what extent are we putting out messages that are telling people that it costs something to belong? And how does that damage our relationship with money, value, wealth, and worth? So that's the work that I do.
Thank you, Chloe. I appreciate that. Raioni, you still there?
I am here taking notes, actually. Just amazed.
Amazing, right?
Yes.
My question to you is, why do you feel it's important to build up the next generation of female activists?
Yeah. I think it's just important for young Black girls to know who they are. I think identity is a huge part of the work that we're doing at 3D Girls Inc. and ensuring and informing young women of their power, of what they possess and what they could do in this world. And as I think about some of the things that were said earlier, and even my presence being here, like, I tend to show up in spaces in my most authentic self, just being you. And as we work through our curriculum, we have a program called Girls Linked Up, where we work right now virtually with young women, empowering them with leadership development. We are working to, right now, because of COVID, we have to deal with that social and emotional piece and that lack of interaction and isolation. So being able to incorporate things to help kids and these young girls understand who they are, even in these dark moments, is super important to us, where we're incorporating, prevention, coping and resiliency skills, suicide prevention. We are tapping into identity to break down those barriers in their minds that's telling them that they can't be this, they can't do that. They don't have that hands-on touch feel to really feel connected anymore. And so in our work, we are intentional about providing resources to young girls to help them feel empowered. We have a monthly subscription box where girls can receive feminine hygiene products. They receive gifts. They receive journals, books, and we go through these different prompts. We go through these different activities that also exposes them to STEAM. Our overarching goal at 3D Girls Inc. is to address any disparities that limit young women and girls from thriving, right? So we touched a bit on, healthcare. early on in our organization, we worked with teen moms, right? Helping to understand the concept of prenatal education, knowing what's going on with your body, knowing that even in the mindset of being a teen parent, your body is changing emotionally. All of these different things that you are going through at this moment are impacting your well-being. And are you ready for that? And what we found is that it's not only teen moms that are experiencing this, right? Those who are at a disadvantage or who are at a place in their life where they are lacking resources or at risk, who have experienced trauma in the form of domestic violence, they are experiencing this lack of education. They're experiencing this shift where they just don't understand, right? Because you literally have to put resources in the hands of people at times. And I think what we're doing is focusing on the identity of women, giving them that empowerment, that encouragement to take those baby steps, if you will, literally taking their hands and walking them through each process so that they know that they have what they need to thrive. And that even happens in our mom circle. We had a mom circle last night that was absolutely phenomenal. All of this has expanded because of COVID, because we realize that stress, depression, and anxiety are the top mental health disorders that impact Black women, right? And helping them to understand that that's real and you can cope with it. And there are ways to cope with it. And so when you're parenting in a pandemic, you have to realize that you're not only your mood, your feelings, your emotion is not only impacting you, it's impacting that child that you're raising. And so how do we cope with that? How do we be present? And how do we be aware for that next generation that we're raising? So a part of our work is focused on parents and focused on mothers, helping them to understand their role as a parent and what that is doing for their child, and helping them to be supported as they're parenting, because we know that we as an organization can't raise your children, right? We want to create this continuum of care that continues to help you and your children thrive. So we get the girls in our program, but then once we get them, we tap into their family structure. We tap into their community. I am just super proud of the work that we're doing, because it's like, we're a very young organization. And within the past 2 years, we have flourished in terms of really meeting our goals in terms of how we impact people. And I can think of last week, we were offered an opportunity for our girls to know how to swim. So they're getting free swimming lessons because they'll be able to advocate for themselves. They have a life-saving skill under their belt. Out of all of the girls that are enrolled in our program, not one girl knows how to swim. Not one Black girl knows how to swim. And just having those key skills, right? And now I have parents saying, how do I get involved? I never learned how to swim. And so it just creates a generational community of generational support, because we start with the girls, but we don't end there. We are distributing food. We have a community here where we have a community closet now. So on a monthly basis, we're distributing household essentials, tissue, paper towels, soap, toiletries, diapers, wipes, and feminine hygiene care objects. We're teaching girls how to utilize feminine hygiene products, right? Not just give it to them, but we have partners that are skilled in this work and helping them to feel empowered. When the swimming came up, that conversation came up, yeah, I want to go swimming, but I can't right now. Where else would a child feel comfortable than in this space where we're creating community? Like, yes, this is something you could still do, but here is how you do it. So it's down to the smallest thing that you can think of that some girls just don't know or have the access or have the boldness to ask questions. And so we start with the youth programming and we work our way through their families, just helping them to identify and feel comfortable with who they are as young people.
Thank you, Raioni. I'm sorry, you guys. It looks like we're out of time. But thank you, ladies. I am going to go down the line, and I do want you guys to tell everybody where they can follow you, how can we follow your work? And we got to make it real quick because I know it's going to cut off. But not only are we breaking generational curses, but we breaking records, and we also breaking glass ceilings. So Raioni, if you could tell everybody where they can follow you on your social media platforms.
Absolutely. You can follow us on Instagram at 3D Girls Inc. Our website is www.3dgirlsinc.org. Really wanted to plug in. We're having a youth pitch competition for girls this summer. So if you are interested in supporting that effort, check it out on our website.
Okay. And Farah?
Yes, you can follow us at Instagram at Black Women's Blueprint. Twitter, of course, Black Women's Blueprint. It's all Black Women's Blueprint. .org is our website, blackwomensblueprint.org. And also please stay in touch with us, sign up for our email so that when we open the space, Restore Forward, you can come farm with us, right? Do some food justice with us, do some land justice with us, come heal with us at our retreat center. It's all there. It's all for us, by us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, blackwomensblueprint.org. Just come to our website. You'll be able to join the mailing list there and see all the work that we're up to and to tap in as well.
And Chloe?
And you can follow me at Chloe B. McKenzie on all the platforms, and BlackFem is BlackFem Inc. On all of the platforms as well. If you follow me, you'll be able to see all of the research that I publish that informs the work that BlackFem does.
And I am Tyranda. You can follow me on all social media platforms at Tyranda J. That's TARHONDAJAY. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I want to pass it back to Saba. I just realized that we do have a little bit more time for a Q&A. We can take some questions for some folks, and then we can end with a closing. Saba?
Hey, amazing.
Hi, welcome back.
I've just been listening in amazement to each and every one of you. The work that you women are doing is really phenomenal, and it's really impacting lives. So thank you for everything that you guys are doing. So anyone that is on Facebook Live, or if you are in the comment section on here, please drop some questions. We'd love to hear anything that you have, any questions from any of the panelists. While we are waiting for some questions to come through, I know, Ty, that you had a really good question about that singer, Danny Lee.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that.
Yeah, you want to talk about that one real quick while we wait for some questions to come in?
Sure. So an artist by the name of Danny Lee, you know, she's a singer, rapper, fairly new in the game, and she recently put out a song called Yellow Bone. And it set off a lot of discussion about colorism in the Black communities. Now, we are all beautiful brown women and Black queens. So I want to know some ways we can excel in a world that emphasizes color, and how do we redefine our definition for success for ourselves? I'll give that to Farah. And ladies, if you feel free to chime in. Ladies, feel free to, it's free for all right now.
Well, I think what's important is that we understand, right? Like, you know, yellow bone, the light skin, dark skin kind of thing. This is an age-old conversation that we've been having, and it's one of the remnants and the impacts of trauma, really, the trauma of enslavement. Yeah. Right? And we know what that caused, right? So on the plantation, the dark skin enslaved people and the light skin enslaved people were separated. The light skin were in the house and the dark skin were in the fields. And then, you know, they were privileged as well. The light skin enslaved people were supposedly, right? It seemed as if they were privileged because they were closer in proximity to whiteness. And so they were privileged in terms of the way they looked, right? They were told they were more beautiful, and they had supposedly, right? It appeared they had more access to things, and that continued on. We internalized that racism. We internalized that plantation mentality. And so we then started to privilege anything that was closer in proximity to whiteness, right? Whatever that is. So I think that, you know, one of the things that needs to happen is we need to really educate ourselves. There is an unlearning and unschooling that we need to do in ourselves and with each other about this light skin, dark skin thing, the conflicts that have existed, throughout our history as Black people, throughout, in fact, the African diaspora. This exists and on the continent. And it's because we continue to live in a world that is white supremacist, and that where whiteness continues to be the status and the standard for beauty. And so the lighter you are, the more beautiful supposedly you are, right? And so I think that it's incredibly problematic. What we're saying to our girls, especially our brown skinned girls, is that they are not as beautiful and that they are not as valuable. And it is a lie. It is a lie of white supremacy, and we cannot perpetuate it, right? And so really it's an undoing, it's a learning. Just as we are sitting here in conversation, this conversation is helping us to heal from the trauma. Speaking truth is helping us to heal from the trauma we've experienced. So I think we need to begin again to have those conversations. This is old.
Yeah.
It's old and we're still dealing with this.
Yeah.
So we need to reopen these conversations and really directly address this music and this song. Of course, it's wonderful that this person is doing something. She's singing, she's a star, she's an artist. We honor her efforts and her labor. However, use that labor for good. Those of us with superpowers, like an audience and music and talent, use it for good. That's all I gotta say about that right now.
Now, wait, stay right here, Farah.
Right.
I do have a question. How can non-Black allies support Black women?
Yes. Well, you know I'm all about reparations. I don't know if this is the right time.
It's definitely the right time.
Drop it right in there. Drop it right in there. I love it.
You know, as the BWB, as the conveners of, you know, the Black Women's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we do believe in reckoning. We do believe in truth telling. We do believe in defining our own meaning and defining what justice means to us. And we also believe in sitting and in engaging with people who are different from us, right? Because we're trying to build our community and our families, yes, but we're also trying to build a new society, right? That's what we've been talking about here. We're trying to build a new society. And so I think white allies have a role to play in rebuilding that new society. There's a role to play in that reckoning that we are seeking so that we can get to this place of, you know, parity, right? So we can get to this place where we can thrive and we can build legacy for our children, whether that is on land, whether that is economically or spiritually in whatever way. And so I think for white folks to support us, there is reparative justice. There is doing the anti-racist work that you should be doing, right? To eliminate racism, to challenge white supremacy, to make way, to get out of the way sometimes, and allow people of color to stand in their power, right? To vote in people into office who are also anti-racist, right? When you vote for a racist, yes, go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off. And not only that, I really do feel like, you know, the other party, they need to educate their children, because these are generational curses as well. These are generational curses on their end as well.
Yes.
So you are what you eat. So if you feeding your children this bull crap and they consuming all this bull crap after eating the wrong stuff for so long, guess what's gonna happen?
That's right.
And to connect it back to trauma, what trauma does is it forces us to create what we call a survival strategy, right? And survival strategies are automatic. We don't actually consciously recognize them until we have the space to start healing. So what I want, especially in the sense of financial trauma, for example, we Black women, Black people, you know, people who have been oppressed, we have survival strategies when it comes to the experience of financial trauma, abuse, and shaming. White people also have a survival strategy that is meant to uphold white supremacy. And so white people really need to understand what are the survival strategies that are automatic and within them that are ultimately trying to, you know, make sure that the white supremacy is upheld. And then just really quickly back to the kind of colorism thing. So not because I went, you know, totally crazy because of COVID and everything, but last May I did the big chop. I did the big chop, and I did this because I started to, again, in the work that I was talking about with financial trauma, I started to say, as soon as there was always a moment where I knew I was going to do it. And I just said, why not? I hadn't put heat on my hair in 6 weeks because we were locked down. So like, why not do it now? And so I FaceTime my, hairstylist, and my white husband takes the clippers and is like, all right, I'm going to listen to this Black woman tell me how to cut my Black life's hair. Like, it's just, anyway, it's very interesting. But what I started in my own, again, nerdy way, I started to realize I didn't look in the mirror for 3 days.
Wow.
Because I didn't feel pretty. I didn't feel feminine. And I realized, to Farah's point, the unlearning that it took to say to myself, you had been adhering to white supremacist expectations and standards of beauty, femininity, and all of these other things, but then also not realizing. So I ended up writing an article, you can check it out, British Vogue published it, about my kind of big chop story. But there's also a relationship between financial trauma, abuse, and shame and Black women's hair. And so that experience, that, to your point, Farah, when we think about all the way back to slavery, it's not just that, the financial trauma was transmitted because our ancestors went through that horrific, genocide, but it's also that Black women also birthed all of the wealth in the Western world that was through rape and sexual exploitation. And so we have a unique struggle against wealth inequality and colorism and other systems of oppression just because we're women. And that's something that we need to make sure shows up. And so in the colorism kind of, effort, I think about our hair as well. It's not just the way that our skin looks, but, we think about what's good hair and all of these other things, and how much money are we contributing to try to get to a certain level of beauty and things like that. So it's all interconnected.
I mean, so I just drawing the connections, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's this relationship between what you called financial trauma and abuse, the racial and gender capitalism that our bodies went through the economics of slavery, the forced reproductive labor, and how connected that is even now to our reproductive wellness, even now to our financial wellness, even now to how we see and value ourselves, our bodies. When we talked about body sovereignty, and Farah connected that to the very ownership of our own bodies and our children. Yes. And how we and our babies became currency in this society, right? Yes. Like, we actually have to draw those connections if we want to heal, if we want to understand why someone's saying yellow bone in a song, if we want to know why white women are not coming at our defense when our lives are being destructed on national platforms and landscapes. Like, those are always going to be connected. And so it's never going to be a simple conversation. But I do think there's layers and layers and layers and depth to our healing. And I'm like, if only we could be afforded the time when we're talking about reparations. I'm like, Black women need time to heal from stuff that we didn't create, but that happened to us and happened to our grandmamas and to our bodies and to our children's bodies. Mm-hmm. We just need to give us some space to just unpack that, right? So the next time we get a haircut, or the next time we get a new job, or we're dealing with something that is very concrete and material in our lives, we can also look more deeply at the intergenerational and generational trauma and historical trauma that is layered within that and seeded within that. So that, that's something that I'll be walking away with from this conversation that I think has been so rich and powerful.
I love that. Reparations not just being about funds, right? It's about time.
Yeah.
It's about land. It's about, other things that are just, the honoring and the respect of our spiritualities, of our ancestry, of allowing us to heal forward and backward. It's all of that repair work that needs to be done, right? That it means some folks need to get out of the way to allow it to happen, let it be done, or support it directly to ensure that it happens.
Right.
Indeed.
Now, I have another question. Mm-hmm. There is clearly a shortage of Black women in leadership, right? Mm-hmm. In positions all across the country. Recently, a CEO of Wells Fargo's came under fire for saying that there were not enough Blacks qualified for leadership positions. What are some ways women can advocate for the elevation of future women?
So part of the initial, everybody's always like, okay, oh gosh, if financial trauma has, the biggest effect on my wealth building capability, I get this question all the time. So what do we do? And it's like, that's why I'm studying it. It's not, there's no quick fix to this because it took hundreds of years we're dealing with having to heal from hundreds of years of violence.
Yeah.
In the context of this, I just talked about this. Saying that there were no qualified candidates who didn't look like this white man, cis white man, is a survival strategy of white supremacy, right? What do we do? So survival doesn't always have to be a positive, right? Like, what is trying to survive? And so that was a survival strategy. So that's one point. The kind of other point is this, in the context of how all of this works, when we have to name violence when we see it. So this idea that there's no qualified candidates, that's actually perpetrating financial abuse. That what is happening right now and not putting somebody in a position of power, the way that women can advocate for themselves in this circumstance is we need to start naming financial abuse and financial trauma when it's being perpetrated in the moment. And so I get this question a lot as well, where, I did a panel on women, wealth, and power, and I say, what would it look like if you were in a negotiation with your boss about your salary, for example, and you know that somebody's not being paid the same? Of course, say that's unfair, and you can use all of these other words, but there's one thing that men and white people hate being called, which is racist. But the second, I think, would be being called abusive. Yeah. So what would it mean? Wow. How do we take our power back to say, not only is it unfair that I'm not getting paid the same, or I'm not getting this raise, or I'm not getting this promotion, that's actually financially abusive. So Can you tell me how you're going to correct and take responsibility for the abuse that you've now perpetrated? So I think the naming in and of itself is one we can advocate for ourselves. That's part of the reason why I wanted to come up with the research in the first place. I was like, what is this called? And now I feel as though my hope for this is that we can begin to use this as a part of our lexicon, that not only are you being unjust and unfair and all these other things, but let's use the language of violence that makes the oppressor so freaking uncomfortable. You're being abusive, you're being violent. And what would that mean? Because I feel as though that does shift the power dynamic a bit, right? Because then the CEO is probably going to be like, oh, snap, do I have to get HR involved? Because now she's saying I'm being violent, I'm being abusive. And it's like, but you are. And that's how we start to advocate and shift the power, I think.
I think something that's also sometimes missing from the conversation is what structures are in place for Black people, like Black women in particular, to take a seat in a corporate setting. Right. One of the things that we're not talking about also is the way in which capitalism functions to degrade and dehumanize like our conditions, like our very being, right? Do you have childcare for this Black woman? Do you have like travel? Do you have the means by which would allow her to be successful, to create success, to create wellness and well-being? Right. If you want her to work 17-hour days and take meetings with other corporate benefactors inside of this system, how are you making sure that she stays well, right? And so I think when we talk about Black women in leadership and positioning Black women to be in leadership, I also just heard Rite Aid is now owned by a Black woman, and that also means Dwayne Reed, I think. So what does it mean for this Black woman to be walking into this corporate setting, right? I'm sure she's qualified. I'm sure she's more than qualified, but are you qualified to nurture her leadership? Are you qualified to hold her in this position? Are you qualified to see her in her fullness and in her humanity? I think that's a deeper conversation about what corporate is doing currently to people of color who are moving into their positions. There are all of these diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and procedures now, but there's nothing in place that says, and this is how we take care of this talent. Exactly. This is how we move them into their leadership and pipeline them through their leadership. So when we talk about advocating for elevation, we also have to talk about advocating for them to be sustained in those roles that they take. I'm thinking about my vice president, Kamala Harris, right? What does she need right now? Because while we're saying there's a shortage of Black people in leadership or coming up in leadership, we're also seeing it demonstrated at the
Mhm.
administrative and federal level. And so what does that
Yes.
mean for Black women who are now stepping into leadership in various ways across the country and how they're supported? So I think when we talk about our empowerment, we get to have a fuller conversation about what that requires and what that necessitates from each of us.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of piggyback off of that, you women are in powerful positions in your organization. How do you ladies just carry on with your day? Because I'm real big on just self-care, making sure I'm good. How do you make sure your mental is okay? How do you just shut it off and make sure you're good? This is easy to care about everybody else and everybody in the world, but how do you shut it off and make sure you're good?
Authenticity. Was it Raioni who said authenticity? We got to show up with authenticity.
Yes.
It is a struggle.
Mhm.
It's a struggle. It is, because we're concerned about everything and everyone. And when we try to be concerned just about ourselves, everything and everyone comes a knocking.
Yep.
Yes.
Where are you? What happened? And there is this level of guilt
Yes.
that we engage in, which is really a low frequency. You know,
But why is that? Why
Right?
is that?
I know. So I think this is how we're socialized. I'm an older child. I'm not saying that this is just older children, but you know.
It's not. I'm middle, so no. I'm an extension. Listen, Farah, I'm an extension cord over here. Everybody plugging in on me. Everybody plugging in.
So it's a struggle, and I think that it's one that we're in. You know, for the long haul, especially those of us who live by, you know, what is it, Alice Walker's saying, or is it June Jordan? I think Alice Walker and June Jordan, everyone said it, that activism is my rent for living on this planet, right? And so if that is it, or, you know, there's those who believe in freedom shall not rest, we don't in the rock. Like this is what we grew up hearing.
Yes.
This is how we've seen our parents operate, our mamas, our other leaders, but there really aren't enough models for self-care. And so I think, you know, you're right. I think this is by having this conversation, I know I myself am becoming more conscious of it, right? And this need to really engage in more self-care. And it's really about setting that boundary and saying, if I don't survive, I'm not going to be able to do the work that I love.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't survive, I don't get to live the life that I love and that I want to live. I don't get to create the society that I want to create and the community that I want to create and be in. And so what is required then of me for myself, my accountability to myself, is that I need to chill sometimes, like shut it off, really take my weekends, even though I'm sitting there or I'm outside, don't think about work, right? Because thinking about work is also work to me.
It is. It is.
Indeed.
So, you know, it is that self-care. I do take at night, I do engage in some breath work because it helps to sleep. I do engage in some meditation because it helps to sleep. But that time off, that intentional time off has become more difficult during COVID. Because for me, I'd have to be away so that I can't even get service and I'm not paying the extra that's required to do that international call. So, you know.
Okay, I'm gonna have to cut you off, Farah.
Yes, I know. I can go on and on.
Now, I lied earlier. I said we was done earlier, but we wasn't. But this time we're done. Again, ladies, give me your info. Make sure you guys give everybody your info and let them know where they can follow you and where they can follow your work.
And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to send them over to Focus for Health and they will get it out to the respective parties. Thank you guys again. This was such an amazing conversation. Really, really important conversations that need to be held. So thank you again. Thank you for Focus for Health for hosting this amazing seminar. If you guys haven't followed them yet, please make sure you follow them. Share this live, email it out in your newsletters. Please, just everyone needs to hear this. So thank you guys so much. Taranda, thank you so much for moderating. Barry, Jennifer, Laura, thank you guys all so much for putting this together, and enjoy the rest of your guys' day. This will also be sent out to everyone as well. So in the comments, in the chat, all of the parties like Instagrams and all that stuff is on there. And make sure you guys follow us too. We're the Black Village Foundation. And then, all right, thank you guys.
All right, bye.
Bye.